Good afternoon, everyone. This is Yvette Kelly with the Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Community Psychiatric Support and Treatment. This webinar is the fourth webinar in the New York State Plan Amendment Service by Service Overview Series. Our presenters for today are going to be Angela Keller and Tiffany Battles, both from the Bureau of Children's Program Design, Policy and Planning Division of Managed Care at the New York State Office of Mental Health, and they will be providing us with a service overview. Before we get started, I want to take a few minutes and go over some housekeeping and logistics. After today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to submit questions for the Q&A portion of today's event. And so we're going to ask you to utilize the WebEx chat functionality, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And if it's not visible, please click the dialog bubble on the top right toolbar and it should appear. Slides and a recording of the webinar will be posted on mctac.org, usually within a week of the presentation. And so if you did not have the opportunity to see the other presentations, you may link back to that site to view them, as well as this one in the next few days. In order to ensure that we're able to answer as many questions as time permits, we're requesting that you send in your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will address them during the Q&A portion of today's event. Please note that questions not addressed today will be incorporated into future training and resources. We would also like to remind everyone that information and timelines presented today are current as of today, and that content presented during the webinar is a summary of the information available in the current draft SPA manual, which is currently available online. Please refer to that manual for further details, definitions, references, and other useful information. So the goals for today will be to review some key information from the SPA manual, to add some context and clarity whenever possible, to generate questions and answers regarding what's being presented, and to help inform service providers' decision-making process around obtaining SPA designation. Please note that the designation process will be finalized and announced at a later date, and a presentation will have the opportunity to identify specific questions that will be offered during that time. Our agenda for today will provide a children's system transformation and SPA refresher and update. We will then have our CPST walkthrough. We will then review some upcoming training and available resources. And then again, at the end, we will have some Q&A. So just as a reminder, if you have questions during the presentation, you can send those in any time, and we will address those at the end as time permits. And so without further ado, we are going to pass it over to Angela and Tiffany for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Moving towards our second to last webinar on the service review of the state plan services. Again, for those of you that have been tuning in, some of this information at the beginning is a refresher. Other parts of it, as you'll see, as new information becomes available, has been changed slightly. So the very first item, what's ahead for New York State's children's system, this week on Wednesday, New York State Department of Health announced a change in the timeline for the Children's Health Home launch, now as December 1st. And hopefully by now, for those of you that are on the DOH Health Home listserv and various other listservs that copied the information and blasted it out, that everybody's had a chance to go through that information. The plan for the new state plan services is still January of 2017. The transition to managed care will begin in July of 2017 for New York City, Long Island, and Westchester, and for the rest of the state in January of 2018. And just as a reminder, what transitions to managed care are the existing behavioral health Medicaid services, the new SPA services, the HCBS services that exist in the 5 1915C waivers, and children in voluntary foster care agencies. So we are still in the process of designing our SPA designation application process for potential providers. We have developed a provider manual which was released in March and is posted online, and anticipate as we keep moving forward that that will be released periodically with new information and any revisions to that. The draft SPA rates will be made public around the time of the SPA application release so that people have some sense of the payment structure for the different SPA services to better inform whether a provider wants to apply. So really what we were trying to achieve with this new state plan, we're really trying to identify children's needs earlier and provide a richer array of behavioral health services in the state plan, which hopefully would maintain children at home with the supports and services they need at an earlier date, and prevent the need for longer-term and more expensive services, and certainly increase the delivery of services following a trauma-informed care approach. So for those of you that maybe have not gotten a chance to review the manual, this slide just outlines what are the different sections and how that is organized. So by service, there would be a definition, an explanation of the service modality, the settings in which it will be permissible to deliver each of the services, what is the admission or discharge criteria, otherwise known as medical necessity, any limitations and exclusions, the qualifications for agency supervisors and practitioners, any training requirements or recommendations, and then staffing ratios or caseload sizes where it applies. So the manual is available both at mctac.org and also the Children's Managed Care website, and that site is listed at the end of the slides. So some key points of these new state Medicaid services. They'll be available to all Medicaid-eligible children under the age of 21 who meet the medical necessity criteria for a service or maybe multiple services. We hope that the services will be delivered in a culturally competent manner and, again, be trauma-informed. The intent is that the interventions that are associated with the services will be delivered in natural environments where children and families live, so out in the community, out in schools, and different settings where it's best to engage children and families. The authority for these services fall under the early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment benefits of the Medicaid state plan. And one reminder for many of us that have been delivering Medicaid services for some time, we are accustomed to the state designing a program, maybe coming up with regulations, having a licensing or certification process, and then those services are brought up in a program model in which a provider has to really meet very specific requirements. These benefits are standalone services, not intended to be thought of as programs. Certainly how they might be implemented in an agency might look like a program in the future, but that is not the intent. So services that are provided to children and families should include communication and coordination with whoever is that family unit for the child and other child serving systems that or providers that are involved in that child's care. Initially, the SPA services will be launched and paid for in the Medicaid fee-for-service system and then transition to Medicaid managed care beginning downstate 6 months later. What we are hoping to do is designate providers by the end of the year, and then providers would have about a 6-month window to contract with plans, and get those things ready, test claims, and that sort of thing. Lastly, I just want to point out that New York State's medical necessity criteria that we've really used as our guide, but for each of the services we will have more specific admission, continued stay, and discharge criteria that's really relevant to each of those services. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tiffany Battles, who's going to go through in more detail each of the services.
Okay. Thanks, Angela. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Battles, and I'm with the Offices of Mental Health. And for today's webinar, we're going to be going over the service Community Psychiatric Support and Treatment, or as we like to call it, CPST. So the important piece is that this is a community-based rehabilitative service, meaning its intent is to restore, support, and improve on skills and functioning that have either been lost or impaired. For CPST, this is really a goal-directed and solution-focused service that really helps the child and families in areas such as understanding the effects of the child's condition, minimizing symptoms that child or youth may be experiencing, and really highlighting areas such as cognitive and behavioral health management and harm reduction. So we're going to move on to defining the family, and on this slide we define the family as a unit of people residing together with significant attachment to the individual. This includes both adults and children, with adults taking on parenthood, caregiving for the children, even if the individual is living outside of the home. The family in our service definition is really inclusive of a wide variation of relationships, and some of these relationships include the birth family, the foster care family, the adoption family, and or a self-created unit of family. So some allowable modalities under CPST, we have options of all interventions need to be face-to-face, and then we have the options of individual modalities. We have group modalities, which we do state should not exceed 6 to 8 members, and just keeping in mind that for groups that the composition of members of the group should really share those common characteristics such as related experiences, developmental age, chronological age, challenges, and or treatment goals. The services may also include collateral contacts, which may include referral sources, other family members, and those other professionals who have contact with the child, youth, and the family. So for settings and caseload size under CPST, the settings are services can occur in a variation of settings, including the community location where the child or youth lives, works, attends school, engages in services, so this may also include provider office sites, and or where the child or youth socializes. So really, depending on the component being delivered within CPST, the CPST provider may find that one setting may be more effective, or that the child may be engaged in one setting more so than the other. For example, the child may really be receptive to CPST services within their school setting. For caseload size, we've really put this needs to be based on the needs of the child or the youth and the families, with an emphasis on successful outcomes, individual satisfaction, and meeting the needs identified in the individual treatment plan. So the caseload size will really vary based on the needs, size, and scope of that child and the families being served. So on our next slide, we have a summary of the service components under CPST, and again, these are goal-oriented and solution-focused service options for CPST. So we have rehabilitative psychoeducation, strengths-based treatment planning, intensive interventions, rehabilitative support, crisis avoidance, and intermediate-term crisis management. And in the next couple slides, we're really going to go into detail on what each of these components look like. So our first component under CPST is rehabilitative psychoeducation. And this is really helping the child and family or other collateral supports that may be involved identify appropriate strategies or treatment options associated with the following. That may include the child's behavioral health needs, minimizing the impact of mental illness symptoms or emotional disturbances, substance use or associated environmental stressors which interfere with the child's daily living, academic progress, resilience, relationships, and community integration. This may also include rehabilitative supports in the community and development of skills to meet the child's employment, housing, and education goals. Our second component is our strengths-based treatment planning. So this is the facilitation of participation in strengths-based treatment planning for Medicaid services and treatments. So this really looks at helping the child and family or caregiver or other collateral supports really identify their strengths and their needs, resources available, and natural supports available within the context of their culture. It also looks at developing goals and objectives to use person strengths, resources, and natural supports to address any functional deficits associated with their behavioral health disorder. Our third component are the intensive interventions, and what this looks at is it really helps the child develop skills to restore stability, support, and functional gains in order to adapt to community living. And this is through providing individual treatment and counseling and or relationship-based supportive counseling, solution-focused interventions, harm reduction, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral management, and or problem behavior analysis. So we really focus on the development of skills in order to further help that child, and some of these intensive interventions, again, are very solution-focused. Okay, our component 4 is rehabilitative support, and these provide rehabilitation and support to minimize the negative effects of behavioral health symptoms or emotional disturbances. So some of these include improving life safety skills, such as their access to emergency services, basic safety practices and evacuation, physical and behavioral health care, knowing when to contact a physician, self-administration of medication for health conditions, and really understanding the side effects of prescribed medications. And we have crisis avoidance. I believe this is our second to last component. So in crisis avoidance, we help the child and family or caregiver to identify or respond to early warning signs of behavioral health crises that would lead to risk of the child remaining in the community. So this includes identification of potential psychiatric or personal crisis, practicing de-escalation skills, development of a crisis management plan, assessment of the step-by-step plan before a crisis occurs, strategies to take medication regularly, and seeking other supports to restore stability and functioning. And our last component is intermediate-term crisis management. So here we talk about intermediate-term crisis management as providing intermediate-term crisis management to families following a crisis. So that would be beyond that 72-hour period in which a crisis intervention team may have intervened to respond to that child's crisis situation. So the purpose of this activity is to stabilize the child and youth in the home and their natural environment, and assist with goal setting to focus on the issues identified from that mobile crisis intervention team that may have come into contact with that child, the emergency room crisis, and other referrals. So I think really what this is highlighting is that some work may be done by the CPST provider in the home with the child and the family to address some of the triggers that may have led up to that crisis experience, as well as assisting with any follow-up on goal setting to really focus on the issues that were identified by whether it was the mobile crisis intervention team, the emergency room, and or the other referrals. So here we move on to our limitations and exclusions for CPST. A child with a single developmental disability diagnosis is ineligible to receive CPST. We also note that under CPST, this does include the implementation of interventions using evidence-based techniques, and these are drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy and or other evidence-based psychotherapeutic interventions. We do note that the use of EBPs under CPST do require prior approval and fidelity reviews on an ongoing basis, and this is determined by New York State. And we also use the definition of CPST in our service manual as the following. The Institute of Medicine defines evidence-based practice as a combination of the following three factors: best research evidence, best clinical experience and that it's consistent with patient values. And guidelines and instructions on how to become designated to deliver a specific EBP are forthcoming. We are still in the process of some revisions within our service manual, so that process will be detailed out in our SPA service manual. So provider agency qualifications, in order to be a SPA provider, you have to be any child-serving agency or agency with children's behavioral health and health experience that is licensed, certified, approved, or designated by DOH, OASIS, OCFS, or OMH to provide comparable and appropriate services. Providers must also comply with additional requirements, including adhere to Medicaid requirements, ensure staff receive training on mandated reporting. Practitioners must also maintain licensure necessary to provide these services, maintain needed insurance, follow safety precautions needed to protect the child population. Providers must adhere to cultural competency guidelines, and providers must also be knowledgeable about trauma-informed care. So on this slide, we look at the staffing and service restrictions around staffing for CPST. So this service, we do note, it can be delivered by unlicensed individuals, so these would be individuals with either their bachelor's or their master's degree, and specificity on what a bachelor's level individual could deliver and what a master's level individual could deliver would really differ based on that service component. So the service components that we reviewed previously, they're really, they differ based on what individual could deliver that, and they're spelled out within this chart that we have here. So in looking at a minimum of a bachelor's degree and 2 years of experience in the children's mental health, addiction, foster care, child welfare, or juvenile justice population, these individuals cannot do intensive interventions, crisis avoidance, and intermediate-term crisis management. So these would be the 3 components that would be restricted for this individual, but they can perform the other 2 components under CPST. If the individual has a bachelor's degree plus a certification in an evidence-based practice, which, as we stated before, would be designated by New York State, they cannot do intermediate-term crisis management, but they can do the other 4 components under CPST. If the individual has a master's degree in social work, psychology, or related human services, plus 1 year of relevant experience, or who has been certified in an evidence-based practice, there are no restrictions, and these individuals may perform any of those components under CPST without any exclusions. So for these unlicensed individuals providing CPST, they all must be under the supervision of a licensed practitioner, which we have listed up on the screen here. So these licensed practitioners include the licensed clinical social worker, the licensed mental health counselor, the licensed creative arts therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed psychoanalyst, a licensed psychologist, a physician's assistant, a psychiatrist, a physician, a registered professional nurse, or a nurse practitioner. We also note that supervisors should have at least 2 to 3 years of relevant work experience, and that supervision must include focus on trauma-informed care and the cultural needs of the child or youth. There's also an expectation that staff have appropriate training related to trauma-informed care and the cultural needs of clients. So children and families can take the lead. So interventions and skill buildings could be identified by the CPS practitioner and family, and may be implemented by the child and family with the assistance of a peer, a psychosocial rehabilitation practitioner, or a CPST practitioner. So I think here we're really highlighting the role of the child and family in also identifying the interventions for themselves, as well as the CPST provider that is working with them. And the assistance of an implemented intervention would be billed by that respective individual under that service. So whether it's a peer service, a PSR service, or another CPST service. For example, if establishing social skills with other peers is an identified goal made by the CPST provider for that child, a PSR provider may come in to assist in implementing some very task-oriented skills with that child, such as teaching them how to interact with other children on a playground or teaching them how to take turns while playing a game with other children. So at times throughout the CPST service, we may have a PSR provider or a peer provider also giving some very specific skills to that service involved as well. So admissions and continued stay. Under admissions criteria, it says that the service is included in the child or youth care plan, that the service is recommended by an LPHA, so a licensed practitioner of the healing arts, and that within the treatment plan guidance that we do have set forth in our SPA service manual, the expectation is that the frequency and intensity of the service aligns with the unique needs of that child. The service is also directed at developing specific skills and/or outcomes such as increasing community participation, enhancing personal relationships, establishing healthy peer support networks, decreasing the use of alcohol or other drugs, increasing independence, developing symptom management skills, avoid or effectively responding to triggers, increase and maintain personal self-sufficiency, and develop coping strategies and effective functioning. So we're moving on to our discharge criteria, and within our discharge criteria, we're really looking at the importance of the child or youth's progress, which would then play a role in determining whether they have successfully reached their treatment goals. And also another important piece that we're highlighting within the discharge criteria would be the involvement of the child, youth, and family in the overall discharge process. So that's a very important piece that we are highlighting here. And in really looking closely at the admission and the continued stay criteria that we just reviewed and the discharge criteria that we've talked about, it's really the intent of being able to intervene early and restore functioning for that child or youth. So we're really focusing in on the detail between the admission, continued stay, and discharge criteria. And please keep in mind that all this detail will be within the SPA service manual under what we're referring to as our medical necessity guidelines, and this will be spelled out for each of the 6 services under our SPA. So in looking at training requirements, we've broken this up into trainings that we feel should be required for those providers who are providing CPST, and then trainings that we recommend. So for components of CPST such as crisis avoidance and intermediate-term crisis management, we really thought about required trainings such as crisis management and avoidance planning and suicide prevention, which we felt would be beneficial and informative for the provider. For components of CPST such as rehabilitative psychoeducation and intensive intervention, really focusing on areas around counseling and several modalities, so that includes individual, group, and family, and emotional, cognitive, and behavioral management techniques. We also note that training may also include EDPs, and for CPST, as we highlighted before, we do have the inclusion of evidence-based practices, which would require approval, designation, and fidelity reviews on an ongoing basis. And again, this would be determined as necessary by New York State. For recommended trainings under CPST, we have domestic violence, motivational interviewing, and certainly with any service delivered in the community, we would recommend some training in personal safety in the community. So we're going to move on to some of our examples of CPST, which we really hope would help to operationalize what the service may look like on the ground. And for our first example here, we're going to be talking about Carlos. And Carlos is a 16-year-old boy, and his family, they're experiencing some difficulties due to his alcohol and drug use. And his substance use is inhibiting his daily functioning, personal growth, and interpersonal relationships. Carlos attends group sessions, which are led by a licensed practitioner for teens who are using drugs and alcohol. So the CPST provider would visit Carlos and the family at home to work on identified goals within his treatment plan, and really focuses on psychoeducation to inform Carlos and his family about the negative effects of his substance use. And in that work that the CPST provider does, it really helps to develop some positive strategies to promote recovery. So Carlos and his family have a goal of improving their relationship as well as strategies on improving his recovery, and they identify the need for CPST once every 2 weeks to assess progress and make modifications when indicated. So, you know, from this example, there's some real potential here for the CPST provider to do some solution-focused work with Carlos and his family to really help Carlos develop some of those skills to help promote his recovery as well as increasing his support and improve his relationship with his family. In our second example, we have Nicole and her mother, Ms. Diaz, and Ms. Diaz is a single parent to Nicole, who is 14 years old. And over the last year, Nicole has been experiencing increased levels of anxiety and depression, which contribute to truancy, failing grades, and strained family relationships. So a qualified CPST provider has collaborated with Nicole and her family to provide weekly treatment services both in her home and at her school. So the focus of the treatment services that Nicole receives are identified in her treatment plan and includes psychoeducation, which is provided to Nicole and her family to really assist them in understanding how Nicole's decreased functioning is related to her current mental health symptoms that she's experiencing. Effective treatments available to assist in minimizing the impact of her symptoms, and also individual psychotherapy to increase Nicole's ability to regulate her emotional states, and resource finding and mapping to also help Nicole and her family identify a network of resources and natural supports that they can utilize to stabilize Nicole in the home. So within this example, it really highlights the component of psychoeducation under CPST, and the CPST provider is really assisting Nicole and her mother to identify the appropriate strategies and or treatment options in order to minimize her anxiety and her depression that she's experiencing, which therefore have been having an impact on her at home and at school. Our last example here we have Jerome, and he is a 15-year-old male. He's a child with significant trauma history, and while Jerome and his father, Mike, have been referred to outpatient in the past, this option has really not worked for the family, and his father has noticed that Jerome's behavior has taken a turn for the worse as he recently began using drugs and alcohol. And due to his recent use of drugs and alcohol, it's now having an impact on his daily functioning at home and in school. So a qualified CPST provider collaborates with the family to provide treatment services in the community, and these treatment services are indicated on Jerome's treatment plan, and they include psychoeducation to really inform Jerome and his family about the negative effects of his substance use, as well as helping him develop positive strategies to promote recovery, trauma therapy to help Jerome address his prior trauma and begin to really heal from that, and assisting the family in identifying resources and natural supports in the community in order to prevent isolation, and also serve as a source of emotional support and aid to the family in this relapse. So again, the CPST provider really working with Jerome and his father to help in Jerome's recovery and healing process from his trauma. And the CPST provider within this example really serves as a resource to help the family reach out to their natural supports that already exist within their community. So we're just going to move on to some areas that are currently in progress and will be finalized and announced soon. We have the SPA provider designation criteria and process that's still underway, and I think there'll be a lot of good information that we'll be pushing out very soon about that. SPA service documentation requirements, which will be within our SPA service manual. So it's probably more detailed since the last SPA service manual that we've sent out to folks. Our utilization management process is also underway and should be finalized soon. And CPST specific finalizations as far as billing methodology and coding structure, another piece that in progress that should be finalized soon, as well as language which will further define our medical necessity criteria. And also any additional limitations that under CPST and any other of the SPA services will be spelled out within our SPA provider manual and shared widely very soon. So that marks the end of this section on CPST. So I will now turn it over to McTack to go over training and resources.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany and Angela, for the great presentation and walkthrough of the service. So as Yvette mentioned at the top of the webinar, one of the goals for today is to generate and answer questions. So we have a couple of slides that if you've been with us for the series will look very familiar to you. So if you do have questions about the presentation or SPA more broadly, now's a great time to start chatting those in. If you use the web browser, there's a chat icon in the upper right-hand or lower right-hand corner that you can click on. And please just be sure to send those to all participants so the folks in different geographic locations can see those as they come in. And so with that, as has been mentioned, this is part 4 of the 5-part SPA training series schedule. So next week we'll be wrapping up and talking through crisis intervention. And we also just wanted to mention that there has been state-led training on the CANS, the Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths Assessment. That was offered in Albany, New York City already. Well, Albany on June 22nd and 23rd, New York City on July 12th and 13th. And it will be offered again in August in both Rochester and New York City. So for more information about that, you can go onto mctac.org, and there's a news item with some of that information. We've been featuring it in the clearinghouse, and I know there's a lot of information circulating. I believe right now the events are at capacity, but there is a waiting list, and people their plans in August do tend to change. So if you're not currently signed up and are interested, we'd point you in that direction. Also just wanted to say that when more information about SPA, the state plan amendment, both designation, rates, et cetera, becomes publicly available, we'll be working with the state agencies to offer both online and in-person training statewide to help providers both with the decision-making process and their planning, and then also closer to go live, which is currently January 1 of 2017, implementation. So we won't spend too much time on this, but as we've talked about it in a pretty great length over the last couple of months, but whether January 1st or otherwise, this is about what the training and technical assistance plan will look like. So as we're going through the service-by-service overviews now, and we'll move into the designation process with that information available, and then very much like things have been done on the adult HCBS side, as we get closer and closer to go live and more information is available, and providers start focusing a little more attention on the area, we'll do a little more work with referrals and documentation, staffing requirements, rates and billing. So look out for more information on those as we get closer to go live. A quick plug for some of the resources and information that's available. So in terms of getting in touch with questions regarding the children's system transformation and managed care, to feel free to send them to your respective state agency mailboxes, which are here on the screen now. And also there's a site with a lot of great information about the design of the children's system transformation, which is hyperlinked below and accessible in the slides that are currently posted at mctac.org. mctac.org is also a great resource. Under the Tools and Resources page, there's a fantastic section, as was mentioned before, where you can find the draft SPA manual and other documents that are critical for providers who will be navigating the transition to managed care and otherwise. And then if you have questions, in addition to sending policy questions to the state, you can please feel free to forward things our way at mctac.info@nyu.edu. Logistical questions about accessing webinars or past recordings or the slides usually receive a response in under 1 day or less. Sometimes we get longer and much more complicated questions, which takes us a little while to go through and make sure we're providing the best and most accurate information, oftentimes in collaboration and partnership with our state partners. So we appreciate everyone's help who's on the line now, just as a quick plug for all your help as we go through the questions that come through. So with that, we are going to open it up for Q&A. So we'll take just a short, brief break as questions start to come in. I'm seeing that we have just one or two things that might have come through so far. So just give us a second to loop around on our ends, and we'll be back with Q&A in a second. But again, please do chat in your questions using the chat function on the webinar. So one question that came through is about the provider manual, which I believe is referring to what's currently a draft SPA manual. So a draft SPA manual is currently available and is actually the basis for the presentation content for today. So that's available on the MCTAC.org website. I believe it's posted on the events page for this event series, and you can also find it under Tools and Resources in the Children's System Transformation section. So yes, very, very similar to how for adult HCBS, there was a manual that was put out to walk folks through the services and provide all the guidelines and policies and procedures. That also does exist here for SPA on the kids side.
So Dan, this is Angela at the Office of Mental Health. We can just begin to take some questions. So one of the questions is, when will providers be able to link children to SPA services? So the SPA services will be launched in January of 2017, and it's at that point that there will be a public list of who are the designated SPA providers for each of the 6 services, and providers and families can begin to access those services. There's a question about the timeline related to the SPA provider designation, provider Medicaid enrollment, and the launch. So I just want to make clear that we hope to release the SPA provider designation application before the end of the summer, and in the early fall be reviewing those applications as they come in and complete that process around Halloween, so that there's a couple of months left in the calendar year for providers to complete their necessary paperwork in the Medicaid enrollment process, get rates uploaded, all those sorts of steps, so that on January 1st, not only are providers able to deliver the services and bill, but the plans can begin a process and can have 6 months to begin the credentialing, contracting, with those designated providers, and also as we get closer to the managed care transition, do some claims testing with those providers. So hopefully that clears things up. Another question is if we could define how these services would differ from the ones provided through the health homes. How these services differ from those that are provided by the health home is that health home's primary function and sole service is related to care management. So how is a health home supporting the family, integrating care, ensuring that children and families are getting to their appointments, getting referred, that the communication is happening across all providers that are serving a child. These SPA services are rehabilitative services that we're talking about in the SPA with these 6. And so a health home or a downstream care management, if they're acting in the capacity of a health home, that's different from how if they are designated to provide a SPA service. The same agency could be a SPA provider and health home provider providing care management. And how SPA services will be incorporated with health homes, again, remember that health homes' primary role is to coordinate care, to communicate, to identify needs, and assist families in getting the services that they need. So the SPA services would be included in a health home plan of care for those children that are enrolled in a health home. Another question is whether the SPA has been submitted to CMS. The SPA application is making its way through the internal review process in the state and will very shortly go to CMS, but we are confident that still allows enough time between now and January 1st to get that approval. Another question for evidence-based practices that use bachelor level practitioners, would they use CPST or PSR? And I'm assuming embedded in that is to bill for. So we will probably end up having a separate webinar in the future on the evidence-based practice designation, requirements in terms of documentation for making those applications, but also talking about how that's billed. In order to be a designated evidence-based practice provider and get the higher rate, the provider first has to be designated as a CPST provider. But some of those models, as many of you know, have both a master's level or could have a master's level practitioner or, a licensed practitioner and a non-licensed practitioner. Our billing guidance will detail out how a practitioner under an evidence-based practice will bill. Those that are unlicensed will bill under CPST. Those that are licensed may bill under OLP, but more guidance will be coming on that. A question related to the type of EBPs that we're talking about. Again, more direction and guidance will be forthcoming, but what the state's intent is that we're looking to designate providers that are providing models, evidence-based models that require some sort of dictated training by the developer. They have to demonstrate operating within fidelity with the owner of those models, and may have consultation or supervision visits or have to renew training or certification on some periodic timeline. But for those of you that are familiar, we are talking about MST, FFT, those sorts of models. We are not talking about a best practice or an evidence-based practice where a staff person might go to a one-day training and incorporate that practice into their normal everyday treatment. It's really a model that's built by some sort of owner that's been proven by research to be effective. We have a question this week, and I believe it came in last week, relating to whether an LMSW can supervise a CPST practitioner. We do have to take that back and get back to everyone on that, and that will certainly be part of future question and answer documents that are posted to the MCTAC site. That's a great question. Under the admission and continued stay slide, does CPST have to be recommended by a licensed practitioner who's linked to an Article 31 clinic, or can that licensed practitioner be attached to other agencies within the children's system? The licensed practitioner can come from any setting, so it could be a child's pediatrician, it could be any other licensed practitioner that child may interact with, so say a licensed social worker in the school who then recommends that one of these spa services would be helpful for that child. So it's intended to be a very broad definition of who that is, and not necessarily associated strictly with a clinic. A question about whether we will be offering more CANS trainings. The in-person trainings that are on, I think, one of the last few slides, that's as far out as they are scheduled for in-person trainings, but CANS training is available online on www.canstraining.com.
Yeah.
And people can certainly get trained online and take the certification exam online. So it is not necessary to complete an in-person CANS training if you were not able to get into one of those. So there are a number of questions that people have typed in that are slight nuances of some of the ones that we've answered. Others we do not have answers for, but as we've been doing with every webinar, preparing a list of questions and answers, and as soon as those are complete, they will be posted on the MCTAC website. The question on whether there's a limit to how many spa services a child and family can have, not from the aspect of if they need a variety of services, those have been recommended, and that's facilitated through a care coordinator to have access. There may be in the future, once the plans are managing all of these benefits, that certainly there would be medical necessity reviews and other kind of utilization management practices. But there's nothing to say that a child couldn't have all 6 if needed.
Angela, I want to thank you for taking the time out to answer those questions. It looks like time is running short, and so just want to remind folks that for additional information, please go back to the website, mctac.org, and if you have any further questions, you can definitely send any questions you have to mctac.info@nyu.edu, and we will make sure to follow up. But as of right now, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we'll hope you can join us for the next webinar. Thank you very much.